well, tell us about the special section dedicated to JFK on TXCN.com.
Well, we design it like a lot of other things we have on TXCN.com to be interactive. So in addition to stories that you can read about the assassination, the anniversary of the assassination, and the events in between, you can also read stories from people who have recollections of it, you know, whether they were alive at that time or whether it's a story they heard from their parents or other people they know. I mean, I printed it out before I came over here. We have 26 pages so far of people who have sent in their recollections, like this one from someone who's a child at the time. Says, I remember seeing the blur of pink of Jackie's dress as the motorcade went past.
Wow, that is amazing.
And you get just so much of that, and it really takes you back. Now, I'm old enough to remember when this happened. I didn't live in the area at the time, but it has a special meaning for me, just like it does for, I think, everybody else who lived through that time.
Yeah, and like you're saying, even if somebody wasn't alive, to remember the stories, maybe how it's impacted their family or what their parents tell them.
And I think if you read through these things, you'll see how what kind of impact that is. I mean, these are all personal stories. You know, in our generation, or in later generations, maybe people remember where they were when John Lennon was shot, or when Princess Diana was killed. But you know, to my generation and to the people of that era, I mean, this was it. This was a defining moment for the world, and it was just a total. I mean, you know, I was 10 years old at the time, but I just remember being shocked, and for the rest of the weekend, I was transfixed looking at the television set.
And especially even to this day, you drive past the grassy knoll. You know, I mean, the fact that this happened in our own backyard.
It's still hard to believe that we worked just a couple of blocks away from where that happened.
Right.
And, you know, I look at that scene, which I'd seen so many times on television, and there it is for real, and it looks pretty much like it did at that time.
We have a DVD that you have, Below Interactive has put together. How can people get a hold of that? What does that contain?
Well, they can get information about it on the TXCN.com website. There's a link on the homepage to click on to get more information about the JFK commemoration of his 40 years since he was killed in Dallas. The DVD is actually 2 discs. There's a DVD and a CD-ROM. One is for your computer, which has recollections from the journalists who covered the story originally. And you can hear from them, you can see what they had to say, you can see the old newspaper headlines. It's an interesting story that you don't see anywhere else. It's not so much about, or it's less about what happened than about the coverage of how it happened. So it puts an interesting spin on it. And then the other disc in the set is a DVD, which has footage, most of which hasn't been seen publicly in at least 20 years. And some of which, or most of which, nobody's seen since it was originally broadcast. And what happened was Channel 8, WFAA, they had a lot of tape on hand, I guess, and they started rolling tape even before the first bulletin was issued that JFK had been shot in Dallas. And it goes through the whole weekend where you can watch as this goes by. You can see their coverage, and it was very primitive, very crude compared to what we're accustomed to now. There was no live coverage of the assassination itself. The motorcade was going through Dallas. It was all on film, so the reports of that were all brought in just by people coming in the studio and telling what they had seen. One of the most incredible sights is to see a man who's introduced as Abraham Zapruder, who we know now had the best filmed account of what happened in Dealey Plaza. He's interviewed live on Channel 8 before his film was even processed.
Wow.
And talking about what happened to him just within an hour or so earlier. So on the DVD, you see it's very raw, it's very personal. It's not very polished in most cases because of the technology of the time, and they were going by the seat of their pants to put this thing together. But you really feel as though you were there.
Right, that's what I was about to say.
It's black and white. And what we've tried to do on the DVD is just to present extended segments, 5-10 minutes at a time, to show you what it was really like that day. It opened, well, one of the primary things you see, first of all, is you see the last time we see President Kennedy alive and vibrant. He's getting off the jet at Love Field, Air Force One. He's going through the crowd, he's waving, he's full of life, and it's just tragic to think about what happened just a few minutes later. But you are actually there seeing this happening live as it was broadcast.
Right, the magic of television, to be able to have that. And some of the people with Channel 8 still, Bert Shipp, I'm sure, is he one of the ones that you talked to?
You will see Bert Shipp. He is he was a long-time assignment editor. At the time, he was the chief photographer and assistant news director at Channel 8, even back then in 1963. And when the assassination took place, he was at the Trade Mart, I believe, waiting for President Kennedy, who was to come to the Trade Mart to give a speech after he paraded through downtown Dallas. Well, that never happened. So Bert went on to Parkland Hospital, and he got some footage of the chaos that was going on there, the limousine that the president had been in, the flowers that Jackie Kennedy had been carrying that were now just strewn across the seat of the limousine. And he brought back that film. He came back to the studio and he talks about what he saw and what he knew from what people had told him. So anybody who lived through the JFK assassination, I think, will want to see this, and I think it has a lot of interest to people who weren't there, who would like to know more about what it was like. It's a historic document that I think will be very interesting to a great number of people.
Back then, seeing the magic of television, now we have, as technology has advanced, the magic of the internet and having this interactive website, a great opportunity for people to be able to tell their stories, like you're saying. And that's something you invite people to do. Log on, tell the story where you were, what you remember. Yeah,
come into txcn.com. There's a link on the homepage. It's very easy to find. And if you feel like sharing what you feel, fine. If you don't, just read through what's there, and maybe that will inspire you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Walt.
You're welcome,
as always.
Let's talk about some of the things that are thrown around as if they're fact. They may well be. Let's see if they hold up to your scrutiny. JFK's death marked the death of hope for a generation in this country. A young man replaced by an old man. Other people say JFK's death in this country, maybe not politically, but mentally, kind of made the Beatles happen, made that phenomenon possible because we were looking for rescue from lack of hope. And other people say that it went on into the 60s and kind of sparked this whole decade of pessimism. Any of that true? Does that hold up?
Well, I wouldn't say it would be the end of hope, but it was the death of one form of idealism, because Kennedy had inspired a younger generation to go to the moon, to volunteer for Peace Corps and other things. And a politician that young, addressing a young audience, his assassination had a disproportionate impact on them. It affected everyone, but I think those coming of political age at the time in particular.
What happened to those people? I know a lot of things happened because there were a lot of people, but as I said, you had LBJ taking over, you had an older father figure all of a sudden, whereas you had a young dashing president leading up to him. Where did those people go? What do sociologists think they channeled their energy into from that point forward?
I think they carried on their activism, only it manifested itself in very different ways, unexpected ways. In the civil rights movement, in the anti-war movement, in the early stages of the feminist movement. If you look at the ages of those leaders now, those that have been active for 20, 30, 40 years, they're all Kennedy kids, basically, who came of political age and saw that activism as flowing from his administration.
Was there pessimism in government generally? Was there still belief in a system? Again, I know it's generalizing, but how do you look at it?
The way I look at it is Kennedy sat atop a cauldron that was bubbling at the time. Culturally, a rejection of conformity, the beat poets, civil rights, and Vietnam. And the way those all played out post-Kennedy Vietnam, Watergate is what turned that generation a little more cynical than they otherwise would be. There was the generation gap. There was never trust anyone over 30. These were all elements of the 60s. I look at Kennedy as the end of the 50s, the end of the sort of optimistic, happy days as we turn the corner and address things such as civil rights in Vietnam.
Here we are 40 years later. It's a week-long, some may say, over-celebration of the event or over-marking of the event. When you look at, you teach a course on the presidency in general. When you look at other events in the American presidency, does this really stack up? Is this the cataclysmic event that everyone makes it to be?
It's one of those events that people who were alive at the time can tell you exactly where they were, exactly what they were doing. I would mark Pearl Harbor, the death of FDR, the assassination of JFK, the beginning of Desert Storm, and certainly for people now, 9/11. Those events are rare. The Kennedy assassination was one of those, and I think what contributed to it was the prevalence of television. Kennedy was the first, as I call it, television president. He married celebrity in politics as a result of the debates with Nixon in 1960 and adopting the innovation of the live press conference.
Do you think that it was a new use of the medium, or the fact that he just was so good at it?
He was the first, or his advisors were, that recognized the potential of television as a vehicle of political communication, but he was good at it.
I mean, you see him
thought well on his feet.
Those press conferences, I mean, he's just an at-ease person. I mean, the camera responds well to something like that because his ease is projected and helps the ease of others.
There wasn't another president after Kennedy until Reagan who was adept at using the medium.
So when you look at it from the point of Kennedy forward, I don't know, do you even waste time or ponder what would have happened if he hadn't been so tragically killed, if he had had scandals, or if he had had just the day-to-day beating of politics that others have had to endure?
I think he handled the day-to-day beatings pretty well. He came out after the Bay of Pigs and said, look, it was me. It's my fault. I was responsible. I made the decision. And his approval rating went up. And he used to chuckle about that a little bit. Second, in terms of the scandals, he operated in a much different time.
Yeah.
We have to distinguish pre and post Watergate. And in fact, much is known of Kennedy's personal life since his assassination, but largely that was an old boy network among the journalists, and there were clear rules what was in the public eye and what you didn't talk about. And I think Kennedy's private life benefited from that. Certainly, if you project him out to the present, either he'd have to change his behavior or he would never withstand that kind of scrutiny.
Thanks for coming by to give us an overview of not only the president himself, but that era and what it became, what came after it.
You bet.
As the nation looks back at the 40 years since JFK's assassination, you'll hear from a lot of journalists who were in Texas at the time to cover the presidential tour. We are lucky enough to have one of them in our family. In fact, he lives here in Texas and has. Bert Shipp was assistant news director and chief photojournalist for WFAA at the time of the assassination. He was one of the first people on television reporting what happened on November 22nd, 1963.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you the chief cameraman and assistant news director of WFAA television. This is Bert Shipp. Bert, we have brought the people pretty much up to date. Would you tell them exactly what you know as of this point?
Well, Jay, I was standing at the Trade Mart waiting his arrival there. All of a sudden, we saw them approaching. They didn't slow down. As a matter of fact, they were going 70 or 80 miles an hour past us. Everybody was unknowingly, didn't know what happened there at the Trade Mart. And then I jumped in a police car and went to Parkland. When I got there, I found that nobody knew too much about where he was hit, but they knew that the president was shot in the head. This is what I've been told now, Jay. The president was shot in the head. Connally was shot in the chest. Both of them are still alive when I left the hospital.
Do you have some film?
And yeah, I have film at the hospital.
Will you get the film and see if you can get it developed real quick,
yeah,
and we'll
I will.
put it on the air
and
run through.
one quote we got out there was Yarborough said, the scene was too gruesome to describe.
I know.
And I've spent most of my time, so I'm going to get the film ready now.
Good. Ladies and gentlemen, let me...
Amazing stuff. Bert joins us now to talk about what it was like to be a journalist back then, covering, at the time, the biggest story of a generation, and may well hold up that way. It's so interesting to see you have to run off to develop film. Today, everything is instant. You just play back out of a camera videotape. How long did it physically take to turn that film around and get it on the air?
Well, the little 3-minute, 100-foot roll that I had, Kodak Tri-X, took about 9 minutes, but the 6 minutes of that was leader as he went through the developing machine. Then your film hit, but sometimes we'd juice that developer up a little bit and it'd spin it out in 7 or 8 minutes, but it had little bubbles in it, little streaks. But I can say sometimes you kind of forgave the quality for the rapidity of the thing. You know, had to get it on the air.
Well, I mean, it was a raw time. It was a time where everything had to happen quickly. I mean, I know it's a minor thing, but just seeing Jay Watson, the man who was with you in that shot there, smoking on the air, and you saw that on national programs too, people smoking on the air. It's just such a different era.
We didn't know any better.
Yeah.
We didn't have anybody tell us it was going to kill us, but matter of fact, the 2 or 3 people in the newsroom had a little snort in the drawer there too, you know. But these were different times, and we were still the main thing we were after was the story. It didn't make any difference how crude the film was, or we didn't know any difference. It's like people back in those days. Some of them didn't have air conditioning. They didn't know what air conditioning was because they didn't have it, and they didn't miss it. But we didn't miss videotape because we didn't have it. But it was getting the story, getting it right, getting it on. And we always wanted to be first, but sometimes we were, sometimes we weren't.
And you're out of breath at that time. There's another film story, and you still work the assignments desk at WFAA, and I bug you. I'm like a lot of reporters who have met you and said, what was it like, Bert? What was this like? And the story that you tell about your first encounter with the Zapruder film is fascinating.
Well, I've learned over the years there's a lot of stories about the Zapruder film, but at one time I was in the newsroom, I was sitting at the assignments desk and doing what I normally do, and these suits came in. They 4 FBI guys, and they said, "Come here, Chip, we want to talk to you." And they handed me this roll of film. I could tell it was 8mm film, and I couldn't. I think it was black and white, and but they wanted me to develop it. And I said, we can't develop that. It's 8mm. I said, we develop only 16. And I said, what are y'all doing? Run all over town trying to get this developed? And they said, well, it's a very important film, and it has a great deal to do with assassination. And I said, well, if somebody's going to drop it in a tomato can, you're going to ruin it, you know, trying to zip it around. And I said, I called a friend of mine out at Kodak and got him out, and I said, the FBI is running all over town with this film. Can you could open up your processor? And he did. Turned out it was a Zapruder film, as I understand.
And y'all had Abraham Zapruder on the air at one point, didn't you?
Oh, right there right a few minutes after the assassination. Yeah, Zapruder was sitting there telling his story about how he took pictures of the president. This and that. Jay was sitting there smoking, talking to somebody on the telephone. He wasn't even listening to what Zapruder said. Zapruder didn't have anything to do with it then. And Jay wasn't a newsman. He was program director, but.
Well, that's another thing that struck us is all the different jobs you guys had. I mean, we just introduced you as assistant news director and chief photojournalist. Today, in a newsroom, a modern newsroom, those 2 jobs are vastly different jobs. I mean, how many different hats did you wear back then?
Well, you did everything, you know, and which was an advantage too, because I would go out. Matter of fact, in the morning, as news director, I would assign stories. I'd give myself 2 or 3, and we'd go out and shoot them. Bring them back, let somebody, usually, you know, whoever the low man on totem pole was, process the film. And then I went back and edited my own film, wrote my own story, and then played producer for the news show, just stack them. Put a story here, story there, commercial here, commercial there.
And again, we don't want to just live in the past. It was 40 years ago. That's why we're marking it. You know, we always get caught up on the numbers. But, I mean, you used to ride around with police cruisers. I mean, you were intimately, you knew them, you knew the scanners, you knew all that. I just wonder how different it was back then. I mean, you didn't have the technology you were just talking about that we have today, but you had much more access. I mean, when you look at a big event that happens today, we're kind of kept back a lot more, aren't we?
Oh yeah, I think over the years we've eroded the trust between the officers and ourselves. The Watergate did a lot of that for some reason, and then the walls came down with other exposés of the police department, and like somebody said, the police weren't very smart, we weren't very smart, but together we were really somebody. But no, it was, they were just like kissing cousins. If we wanted something, we went in and asked for it, and they said, well, it's over in that file, go ahead and get it, or they'd come down to the press room and get us to witness statements that the suspects would give, and I went to supper a lot of times with the chief of homicide, Captain Will Fritz, and he was always telling me things.
When you look back on that particular weekend, I mean, we look at it as a series of events. We can look back with hindsight, but I mean, what did it feel when, I mean, one thing kept happening after another, stacking on top of each other? What was it like as the pressure built? I assume it was pressure filled.
Well, it was pressure, there was disappointment, there was anxiety, but you know, as you're doing your job, you anticipate things news-wise. You don't say, oh me, oh my. I know when my wife made me go to church on Sunday and repent for my sins, and I came out and they said, Ruby just shot Oswald, and I said, oh, boy, isn't that about right, you know? I thought, you know, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen, you know. And I showed a little disappointment there, but I was about tired of the darn thing then.
Did you ever stop afterwards to kind of soak it all in? Did it ever reassemble in your mind?
3 or 4 days after that, 2 or 3 of us, 4 or 5 of us got a room down the hotel and probably overserved ourselves, but we got to talking about, you know, what really went on. I said, man, this was one great story, wasn't it? You know, we may never have another one like this. And we told each other our stories and had another soda pop.
Bert Shipp, more than any building in our organization, you are a treasure. Thank you, sir.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you, Michael.
Fred, this is a huge production. The DSO, Symphony Chorus, Children's Chorus, dancers, soloists. Describe the program for us.
Well, Mass is both a spectacle and spectacular. It is an enormous production, big cast. It involves over 200 people on stage at one time, including musicians and, as you said, singers and a children's chorus and a rock band. It's incredibly large in terms of the forces of involvement. It's also musically an incredibly diverse piece.
Incredibly. Yeah, like you said, there's the rock, there's the classical, there's the Broadway. Why did Bernstein write it that way?
Well, you know, sort of the eclecticism was so much a part of Leonard Bernstein's musical DNA, if you will. You know, he wrote in all those styles, and somehow that all came together in this piece. And it's also very, I think, evocative of the 1960s, both in terms of sort of the emotional journey that the piece goes on, and certainly the musical content as well.
You're doing the full stage version?
We are. It's never been done here in Dallas.
How long does that take?
It takes 1 hour and 45 minutes, no intermission, because you don't want to lose any of the impact of the performance, because it's, you know, it's really very powerful when you see the whole thing.
That must be quite a challenge to stage.
It is. It is in order to do this production, we put a stage extension on the stage of the Meyerson.
Really?
Yes, and it really is. That's why it's not done all that often.
How will the exhibits from the 6th Floor Museum be incorporated in this? There's a little bit of something going on in both places, right?
Right. Well, of course, Mass was written for the opening of the Kennedy Center, and that's the connection here. It was commissioned by Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis for the opening in 1971. And so the exhibit actually speaks to the composition of this piece and the opening of the Kennedy Center. So that exhibit has been in the visitor center at the 6th Floor Museum, and then it's going to be over in the lobby, so that when people come into the performance on Saturday and Sunday, they'll be able to see and read a little bit about the history of the piece and then go in to see the performance.
A learning experience within the context of a huge theatrical experience for many folks.
Absolutely.
Fred, good luck with it. Fred Bronstein of the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sometimes lost in the tragedy of JFK's assassination 40 years ago, there were 2 other deaths that fateful day. One, of course, Lee Harvey Oswald's murder by Dallas strip club owner Jack Ruby. But just 45 minutes after Kennedy was shot, Dallas police were on a frantic manhunt for the gunman. Officer J.D. Tippett was patrolling the Oak Cliff area when he spotted a man matching the description of the suspect. It was Oswald. Oswald shot Tippett 4 times, the last a fatal bullet into his temple. For the first time since his murder, Officer Tippett's wife spoke in depth about that day and about the life after and before November 22nd, 1963. Joining me now is Michael Granberry, the Dallas Morning News, who spoke to Tippett's widow, Marie Flinner. Thank you so much for being with us. We certainly appreciate your time.
Appreciate it.
It was just an amazing piece to read in that we got so much insight into who she is and how deeply affected she was by Officer Tippett's murder. If you could just kind of describe to me the life that they had, the life that she described before his murder.
Well, she's a great lady, and she's a very loving mother and a loving wife, and you can tell that she's still very much in love with this man, despite the fact that she has married 2 times since. This is the man that she loves and continues to love. And they had 3 children at the time of his death. And you really get the sense that she and the children never fully recovered from his death, which was made all the more complicated and strange by the fact that the man who killed him also killed the president.
Absolutely. And it was evident from your piece and the number of times that she got really teary-eyed. I mean, it's been 40 years, but she never has really recovered from this.
Right.
She has turned down all kinds of interviews, book deals, movie deals. Why did she decide to talk now?
She says that the reason she turned down so many over the years is she wanted to protect her children. And she drew a comparison between herself and Jackie Kennedy, who wrote her and sent her an autographed picture in the weeks after their husbands were both killed by the same person. She draws a parallel between herself and Jackie. She says that she wanted to protect her children in the same way that Jackie protected hers. And she felt if she agreed to an interview, if she agreed to newspaper interviews or did a book, that it would expose her children to a public eye that she wanted to shield them from. But now that they're grown, she doesn't feel quite as concerned about that.
How does she react to the many, and there have been so many, conspiracy theories that somehow link her husband, Officer Tippett, to those who conspired and plotted to kill the president?
That is probably the deepest hurt of all, because many people regard J.D. Tippett as a hero. Had he not stopped to question Lee Harvey Oswald, who knows what might have happened. Because he did kill Officer Tippett, he was arrested a short time later in the Texas theater, where people forget he almost killed another police officer. That officer managed to get his thumb between the, what is it, the hammer and the plate of the pistol, or otherwise there's another person killed. Oswald actually came fairly close to killing almost 5 people that day.
Wow.
And she, you know, the conspiracy stuff is just really deeply hurtful to her. And of course, some of it, though, is so outlandish and bizarre. There's one theory she mentions that they say that he was meeting with Jack Ruby the night before, and she said, I had a PTA meeting. He was taking care of the kids. He was in bed by 9:30. The kids were in bed earlier. And she's also upset by some of the publicity that occurred. There was a National Enquirer story that says that she never told the children about the murder and that she kept that hidden from them. And she says there was an AP wire photo that went out all over the world of Curtis, her youngest, sitting by the casket before the funeral. So she says, how would I have explained that to him? So those are things that continue to bother her.
Quickly for us, can you tell us, is it any consolation to her that her husband's death led to identifying Oswald as the murderer of the president?
She says the police told her that had a lot to do with it. And, you know, Oswald at that moment was wearing a zipped up jacket that concealed a handgun. He was apparently sweating. And she said that was exactly the kind of radar that her husband had for that sort of thing.
As I said, just a very moving piece, and thank you so much for being here to talk to us about it.
Thanks very much.
So, it's not a magic bullet at all. It's not even a single bullet theory, in my opinion. It's a single bullet fact.
That was a clip from last night's ABC special, The Kennedy Assassination Beyond Conspiracy. As the nation prepares to remember the events in Dallas 40 years ago, there remain so many theories about the president's murder and what happened that day. ABC's Peter Jennings joins us now in studio. Thank you very much for joining us.
I hope there are not that many theories after last night.
Well, that's my first question, is if you've had a chance to gauge any of the reaction yet.
Well, my first reaction came from my children, who were in their early 20s and who grew up on the Oliver Stone movie, which so many members of their generation, and probably yours did as well. And my son said afterwards, well, you know, we didn't believe the Oliver Stone movie that much, Dad, because that wonderful man you've seen on the screen there is a man named Dale Myers, who's an animator and who created this forensic animation for us of precisely what happened in Dealey Plaza on the 22nd. And by using it, we were able to take on so much of what was in a variety of conspiracy theories, but particularly what is in the Oliver Stone movie. So it was a very invigorating occasion for us to be able to do this.
You specifically didn't counterpoint conspiracy theories, but did specifically address Oliver Stone. Why did you feel that that was important?
Well, because it's the most widely dispersed information about the Kennedy assassination, which is simply not correct. And exactly, I think in retrospect, we really did address the conspiracy theory. We addressed the mafia conspiracy and found it didn't have any evidence to support it. We addressed the Cuban conspiracy theory and found that there's no evidence to support that. Excuse me, and the Soviet one as well. But the Stone one is out there for the public and has been there for all this period of time, where the others have drifted in the ether of the conspiracy community.
I was struck by Lee Harvey Oswald's brother and how convinced he is that Oswald acted alone. But it left me wondering if Oswald did this to gain this notoriety, to get this attention, why not confess? Did you talk to anybody who explains that at all, or has?
Well, I think most people believe, and I did at the time too, that I did at the very early stages. None of us really were quite sure it was Oswald. And the reason he didn't confess is he didn't have a chance to confess. He was dead in a couple days. And that is, of course, what added to the conspiracy theories for all these intervening years, because without him to talk, and if you couldn't pin a conspiracy assassination on Ruby, who shot Oswald, then there didn't seem to be much there. But Oswald went to his death with whatever secrets he had in his mind, and I ultimately don't think he had many more than his own demons.
You set out knowing full well there are plenty of conspiracy theorists whose minds are probably tough, if not impossible, to change. Did you set out to change those minds?
Well, I think we set out fascinated by the fact that 40 years later, close to 75–80% of Americans, we thought originally, it's closer to 70% of Americans still believe there was a conspiracy. And that gave us a wonderful backdrop on which to work. It gave us the backdrop of the times when people didn't trust government. It enabled us to talk about the Cold War. It enabled us to talk about the shift of power in the United States and what happened in terms of the American-Soviet relationship and the American-Cuban relationship. It gave us a chance to talk about how government was never very forthcoming. And it gave us a chance to revisit again this extraordinary character, Lee Harvey Oswald, who we'd sort of lost as a character. And Jack Ruby, to some extent, who was also lost as a character in history. And so we were able to go back at all of those things, and one way to deal with it was to deal with all the conspiracy. You know, there are like 500 books been produced about this thing in the intervening period. Thousands of articles, hundreds of documentaries on television. We're only the latest round, and while we think we were definitive, I won't be surprised if people do it again in 10 years.
You were a young reporter in Toronto at the time, in the airport when you first heard?
Yeah, I heard it on the public address system. And I looked up at the departure board and found that there was a flight leaving for Dallas almost immediately. So I called my news director and said, I think I should go to Dallas. And he said, well, I'm not sure. Why don't you just come home?
Did you overrule him?
I didn't overrule him, I just went.
You just went? Dallas is home and family and career and Dallas Cowboys to so many of us and our viewers. I wonder, in your travels around the world, if you find that many people still think Kennedy when they think Dallas.
Oh yes, I think to some extent, but they also think Cowboys too, as well. And I think they also think that Dallas is a unique city and a pretty forward-leaning Texas city. I mean, the first city of Texas. I think that Dallas is the place where John F. Kennedy was assassinated is long gone as the image of Dallas. I mean, you're too young, but in the early days, as many old Dallasites will remember, people thought this was the evil city and that Kennedy had been killed because there was something evil here. It wasn't true at all, really. When you look back at the huge crowds that turned out to see the president on that day, you realize.
I was struck by that in some of the footage
me too.
last
I go
night.
back and look at all those old movies, old films that I've seen hundreds and hundreds of times over the years, and you're reminded again. But it was very hard for Dallas. I mean, 2 murders, you know, within a few days. But Dallas, I think, got well past that.
ABC's Peter Jennings, a pleasure to meet you.
Nice to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Reminder, you can log on to our website for more information on the JFK assassination, txcn.com. We have a special section set up, that's /JFK. We're back in a moment.